Welcome to our podcast series on diversity and inclusion, brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading independent professional body dedicated to promoting best practice and raising the standards of coaching worldwide. I'm Dr. Alexandra Morgan, Senior Lecturer and Coach Educator. In this series, we're privileged to be talking to a superb range of coaches and consultants whose work is making a significant contribution to advancing diversity and inclusion in society and in the coaching profession. We hope this series sparks curiosity and encourages change. Welcome back, everybody, to our podcast series on diversity and inclusion. I'm Alex Morgan, and with me today, I have Jannine Perryman. Hello, Jannine.
Hello, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. And you?
Yeah, very good, thank you.
Jannine, you're the CEO of Neurodiversity Network, CIC.
That's right.
Tell me about that.
Well, for the last 3 years, I've been operating as ADHD Wise UK, which was set up as me as a sole trader when I left special needs teaching and went into coaching and training. It's been successful, very successful, because we already had an online model. When lockdown happened and the online model became the only model, we were already set up and we did incredibly well. And at one point, we had a team of 16 coaches over the course of that lockdown. Obviously, that's too much to have as a sole trader. So we set up the CIC, which, because of my background in special needs education, in psychology and in all sorts of other things as well, it was a perfect opportunity to change things up and to broaden our offering to include not just things to do with ADHD, but to also sort of like to bring on the skills and the experience and the knowledge and the training around autism and dyslexia and dyspraxia and dyscalculia and tics and Tourette's and a whole plethora of other conditions under the neurodiversity umbrella. So there's an awful lot going on.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Tell me what a CIC is, because I think our audience may not necessarily know.
So a CIC is a community interest company, so it's run for the benefit of the community. So it's not for profit. Well, we get paid, but it's not for profit.
Also, if you wouldn't mind, can you tell us a little bit about neurodiversity, in terms of what that means to you personally, to your company, and what that word means to you, what conditions it encompasses from the point of view of your company and what you do?
Okay, so if I can say, first of all, technically, neurodiversity covers conditions such as autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, dyscalculia, tics, Tourette's, and many other conditions that are associated with that. 20 to 30% of people are believed to be neurodivergent, so sort of like varying from the standard way of brain wiring. And obviously the world is designed for and by the other 70 to 80%. It's very tricky for people who are wired differently to function the way the rest of the world expects them to function. Those 20 to 30% are considered to be neurodivergent or neurodiverse, depending on your terminology. What it means to me, I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 41. My oldest daughter is diagnosed with autism and ADHD, and my twins, my 18-year-old twins, diagnosed with ADHD. And as a special needs teacher, I'm sure you can imagine, my experience with regards to all sorts of conditions is broad and varied and quite deep. I'm very interested in sort of the inequality that comes from being sort of marginalised and othered because we don't function within that. So very, very solution focused. So, for example, if you know that someone's struggling in the workplace because of their communication style relating to their autism, or you know that somebody is struggling to manage deadlines because they've got ADHD, or you know they're struggling to write reports because they've got dyslexia, it's about getting solution focused with those people to overcome those barriers. That's what we do, is we help people to identify and remove their barriers, and that might be by sort of making it really clear to their employers what their employers can do to help. It's the serenity of things, really. It's working out what they need to accept about their condition and what they can do something about, where they can sort of help themselves to move through, without ever asking people to mask and pretend to be somebody that they're not, or at least not for very long anyway. You might do to get through a particular situation, but really we are who we are. And masking is exhausting.
Yes. Yeah, I can imagine. Exhausting, very stressful. Did I hear you say the serenity of things?
Yeah, that's sort of like the understanding what you have to accept, changing what you can, and having the wisdom to know the difference between the two. The serenity of things is how I tend to put that, and how I sort of say things to people. And There are things that we can change and there are things that we cannot. And that is where the wisdom is. And that is where people find the most amount of peace as well. I think it's also quite helpful with regards to helping people with their studies or with their work, with their employers, to say, look, these things we can do something about these things, but you're going to have to come the full way in order to meet this particular need. So it's sort of like working that through with an individual and then maybe also with their employer, university or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, and you have a specialist team, don't you, of specialist coaches, counsellors, teachers. I think you also have a screening clinic.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
We're just doing adults at the minute, but we are going to, and that's from the age of 14, actually. We will make it younger than that, but I just wanted to sort of start with the sort of where we're strong. And, with adults, you can ask for a bit more accommodation with regards to any errors that we might make at the beginning of the process. So we're just sort of going with the adults at the moment, and we will increase the offering to include children as well. But there is such a backlog now with regards to getting an assessment for any of these conditions. We don't currently offer dyslexia, but we are looking to sort that out as well. We're recruiting for that at the moment. The difficulties with regards to getting a diagnosis, and we cannot diagnose, but we can screen and produce a decent report and accommodations at university, in the workplace, and actually even in school. You don't need a diagnosis for that, but a decent report that suggests what your needs are and how your employer or your university or your school can meet them is very, very helpful.
So what's the technical difference then between a screening and a diagnosis?
I'm not a doctor, therefore I'm not allowed to diaggnose. The process is exactly the same. We use a sort of combination of tools to get to that point. We use QB Check, we use Neurodiversity Profiler, and I use Professor Susie Young's ACE package to do my interviews. So it's all sort of very well sort of supported stuff, and it's triangulated so they get a really, really good report, and it's quite robust. But I'm not a doctor, so I can't diagnose. And that's really the only difference.
Yeah. And so how do people come to work with you? What would be their access point?
Well, we've been very successful by word of mouth, and because I'm associated with people like QB Tech and with ADHD Foundation and various other things. So by word of mouth, we've done very, very well. We haven't really had to do very much by way of advertising. It's just been people have just approached us, usually as ADHD Wise UK, and obviously that will change now to being to Neurodiversity Network, CIC. So they can literally click on a link and book an appointment, or click on a link to book an appointment to have a conversation with somebody to work out who the best coach for them might be. Coaching's marvellous stuff.
Yeah.
Changes lives, and it's very, very underrated in the UK. But if you look at the American model, it's very, very widely accepted over there that coaching is helpful. But we're a bit slower on the uptake, I think, in the UK. A bit too much sort of stiff upper lip, and we just got to crack on with it. But the reality is somebody else having it taking overview of your life and giving you independent sort of opportunities to process that and come up with a plan is incredibly useful.
So what background and knowledge do your coaches have in terms of being able to work with you and the clients that you have?
We have our own in-house training program because with the teaching background and the psychology background and everything else, I'm able to deliver training on that. And we're working with the Association for Coaching on a package that accredits people in a variety of ways, because one of the things we know from the people that have come to us who would make great coaches but would struggle with some of the academia is that we've got to look at other ways of capturing the evidence that they can meet the requirements of coaching. So we're working with the Association for Coaching to come up with a model that is robust moving forward, and we're very open to that sort of like difference in terms of assessment. But their training mostly comes from me and from the team, because we run group coaching sessions. The starting process for anybody who's working with us is to actually piggyback that, so they're taking sort of part in that as if they were a participant.
Okay, yeah.
And they get that sort of like interaction with other people.
Good
They
idea.
get to have these conversations with people, and we're quite unique that way. I think we're the only people that run an 8-week program for adults with ADHD. I also train on the National Autistic Society's Essential Autism package as well, so they get that for that. We did try to run an adult autism group. It wasn't as successful. Not really sure why. I think that perhaps that was because we were still branded as ADHD Wise at that point. Perhaps
right,
perhaps we're branded as Neurodiversity Network, so we might have some more success with that.
Earlier, you gave us a little bit of an example of the kind of work that your coaches do. I wondered if you could give us some more examples. How do your coaches help the clients?
There's an awful lot of patience and openness that comes from working with neurodiverse people, and you really do not know what you're going to get from one client to another. It's very, very varied. And we do have people who on the autistic spectrum who are working in positions where they're required to be very compliant, which is perfect. Somebody on the autistic spectrum who's got that great attention to detail is very well suited to a job in compliance. However, some of the sort of social rules of things and some of the nuances can often be lost on them. So it's helping them to understand their role in what isn't quite working, and also working with the employer to make sure things work. So if you've got autism and you're working in compliance, you'll be very, very good at your job, but you may sometimes kind of get a little bit stuck in the detail of things and be like, no, that's what the rules say. Mm-hmm. So that is, I'm holding firm to that, and then upsetting other people, and then being upset yourself when other people are saying, no, we're expecting some flexibility there, and that it's very, very difficult. So I might be encouraging somebody to think more broadly about that and to sort of stretch their rule of I am right, so that there's perhaps a bit more encompassing of nuance and of different sort of flexibility of situation, but also speaking with the employer about how important it is that the person's in the right job, because they are holding firm to that. And if you want them to flex, it's not just a question of asking them to flex, it's actually saying, it's giving them new parameters. It is saying, it's the if-then rules. It's setting new if-then rules with the employer. So the employer sets them with the employee, where if this situation, then you revert to this, and in this situation, you revert to that. So that's the sort of stuff that's helpful. And there's a sort of like a middle ground there, isn't there? It's sort of understanding that the person with autism understanding there needs to be some level of flex, but also fundamentally, because of the way they're wired, they need to know to what extent and in what circumstances and in what situations. Otherwise, it's very disempowering and very frustrating, and then you end up with behaviours that are perhaps not what we want to see in the workplace, or you end up with sort of sick leave and things like that. So,
and it sounds like that you're actively engaged with the employer, so that sort of three-way contract that a lot of other coaches work to, but it sounds to me like that three-way contract between coach, coachee and employer is absolutely vital in this particular instance.
Yeah, I mean, obviously some allow us to do that and some don't. But the co-coaching model with employers is actually a very, very good idea, because even then, if you know the line manager, but I know the line manager as the person's coach, they've met me because we've had a couple of sessions together. There's that whole sort of like, well, why don't you have a conversation with Jannine about that and see what she says as a way forward? Because I've then become part of the solution focus. And that's obviously very helpful and constructive, but it's not possible in all situations. It's not appropriate, and it's not wanted in all situations. But where it's wanted, absolutely, that's stuff that we do and do very well. Because way back, I had my own recruitment and training company, so that sort of staff retention stuff I get very, very well. And that was actually where I sort of started coaching, was back in the day before I even went into education. So it's sort of like bringing together all of those skills and all those experiences and training my staff to do very much the same.
And you say a lot of the work, or a majority of your work, is word of mouth, but how would an employer find you, for example? How would they, if they identified somebody that they thought that needed help?
That tends to happen on Google search, and we seem to come up reasonably high on that because we deliver the training as well. So actually a lot of it comes from sort of having the training aspect in there as well. It's definitely sort of brought us some employers that we can work with. We worked with a hospital up in Manchester a couple of weeks back because they had difficulties with understanding what they needed to do for one of their employees. So I think that was hilarious, because there is me delivering training on ADHD to the NHS. I do think that did tickle me. But of course, it's in a different context, because it's in the context of an adult in the workplace. But it was, it's good work. And they find us, that's how they tend to find us is Google search.
I know that you've got a team of coaches and you've got a team of counsellors. So I was wondering how their work differs, if it does.
So counselling is more a model of sort of like looking back and dealing with any emotional load, any unprocessed difficulties or emotions and feelings that have gone on in the past in order to get somebody to be emotionally well. Whereas coaching does look back, but only insofar as helping to identify any barriers to moving forward. And we're very clear that if we don't feel that somebody is well enough really to be pushing themselves forward and they need to stop and take a bit more time and be well, that we direct them to the counselling model for a little bit before they come back to the coaching, or do both at the same time if they can, if they want to. So this week, I was having a conversation with somebody and she said, we've really sort of like hit upon something there and I do feel a lot better, but I've realised that there's this stuff from before that I need to deal with. And so she's going to see one of my counsellors for 8 weeks, and then we're going to take a view on it from there as to what she wants to do from that point onwards, whether she wants to do both or one or the other. We're lucky that we can sort of switch backwards and forwards and still take care of the same person within the same organisation. So they've still got continuity of care. Because I run the organisation, she's still going to be able to speak to me from time to time. She's still going to be able to check in with me. So it's a nice model. But yeah, coaching does a slightly different thing from counselling. Well, it's a very different thing really, because it only looks back in order to move forward. Whereas sometimes we just need to be still.
Yeah, good point.
And mop up some stuff from the past, and we can't move forward while we're still mopping up from the past. Not as effectively as we like to think we can anyway. We kind of like all want to put on our own superhero cape for ourselves and put on our own armour and push through. That backfires. You've really got to sort of take the time to sort of stop and be okay before you can move forward.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, it's relevant to a lot of us, isn't it? That, yeah, really good point. I'm wondering about the training. So the training that you guys provide or will provide with the Association for Coaching around neurodiversity. Can you give us a little flavour of what that includes?
So we're working with Jeanette from the Association for Coaching on that at the moment, and working out what we need and what we want, and sort of different ways of collecting the evidence, looking at the coaching framework and matching skills to the framework, really making sure that we are giving everybody what they would need to be a good coach full stop, but then with the extra advantage of doing accredited training around neurodiversity, as well as our own very, very bespoke in-house setup. Yeah, the intention is to have an accreditation, to develop a process with the Association for Coaching, whereby that we're following a particular process that comes through and at the side of that. So it is very much attached to the coaching framework, making sure those things are there, using standard things, just making variations on them to accommodate.
Oh, that sounds really interesting work. And it made me wonder, because if we're looking at the competencies that we already have with the Association for Coaching, what you might not have done, the work yet in depth, Jannine, so forgive me, but I'm just wondering whether they are all compatible and transportable, if you like, to your work, or whether there are some that may need to be considered or reframed in the context of neurodiversity.
I think contracting can be slightly different. We might need to make some more accommodations. So if you were dealing with somebody with anxiety, you might want them to be able to touch base in between sessions, and some coaches facilitate that and some don't. So it's things about thinking about those sorts of things. It's also about language, because we often use language in quite a dismissive way. So the word just can be quite loaded, and just do it doesn't apply in the world of ADHD, for example, because if we could have just done it, we would have just done it already and we wouldn't be asking for help. So it's some of the diminishing language that of the struggle. There is a huge struggle to overcome some of these things. When your neurology is different to everybody else's neurology, and that is not what people are expecting, you don't know by yourself how to work the way through that, and you can get very, very stuck, and the coach can help to unstick you. So a lot of our work with our coaches is helping them to understand how language matters and how we must validate the experience of the people we're working with before we ever try to move them on. And using the use of the word just is a classic case in point, because it is often used in a very diminishing way. Well, just do this bit, just do that. If they could just do it, they would have just done it already. So we kind of, on my training slides, there is a slide that just says just, for that reason, and then we talk about that, and it's funny because then for the next couple of weeks after that, everyone's very conscious of when they're using the word just, and the reality is you can't have a conversation without using the word just. But it's using it in a diminishing way that's the challenge. So it is, language has a lot to do with it, and the literal thinking, for example, with autism, and understanding that your clients with ADHD may be late or may forget their appointments, and having sort of reminder systems set up, but understanding that if they don't turn up, that does not mean that they are not committed to the process. It means they have ADHD. So it's just sort of changing your mindset on that, and still contracting, still whatever it is you've got in place with them is still what you've got in place with them. But just understanding and not judging in those situations. There you go, just use the word just. Because actually it's difficult to ask a neurotypical person to accommodate those things, because neurotypical people are not used to accommodating such things. But the reality is somebody who is turning up late does not mean they're not committed to the process. Because they haven't done the thing that you agreed with them they were going to do last week doesn't mean they're not committed to the process. Because they got overwhelmed and didn't manage to do the admin task, but they've got dyslexia, doesn't mean they're not committed to the process. It means something else was in the way. So the question is always, okay, is it still important to do it? What were the barriers to getting it done? And then working fresh again. So it's different that's just a sort of subtle difference, but it's quite a big difference.
Yeah, that's really useful. Thank you. And it struck me as you were talking that, some of the more very sort of heavily goal-oriented models of coaching in and of themselves may not work, or may not be the best thing.
They may not work in the same way. They will probably work. In reality, there are some things that will work for a period of time. Someone with dyslexia and dyspraxia and ADHD may struggle to maintain it and may need variety, depending on where they are. Somebody who's got mental health challenges, which, to be fair, most of our people do have some level of mental health challenges, all fluctuating what they can do from one time to another thing. So having more than one set of tools to overcome one particular situation is actually useful. And because it sort of stopped working after 2 weeks doesn't mean it doesn't work. You keep it and you put it in your toolkit and you refer to it another time. So I have electronic diaries as well as paper diaries, and great big whiteboards as well. And sometimes I want to work with one and sometimes I want to work with another. By virtue of having different neurology, I need variety in the way I do these things. When it all becomes too samey, it just becomes uninviting, and I don't want to engage them with my electronic diary. So I'll switch to something else, and then I'll go back to my electronic diary when it suits me. And that's something that, as somebody who is neurodiverse, I get that in a way that apparently is quite not really understood by the rest of the world, but that's what works for me. So it works for a lot of people. So having more than one way of solving a problem is helpful. With ADHD, with autism, slightly different. With dyslexia and dyspraxia, it would also work. Dyslexia too, because of the executive function challenges. With autism, they tend to like to have a particular way of doing things. But then, of course, you've got the overlap where you've got autism and ADHD, or a different set of different combination, and then that causes some challenges too. Because the ADHD bit wants novelty, and the autism bit wants sameness and predictability, and one sabotages the other. So then we have different challenges.
Coaches that aren't associated with your network but might already be working with neurodiverse clients, is your network available for them, in terms of help and support with their clients?
We are planning on 4 times a year running a one-day event to external people. But obviously the majority of our work is for our team, because we want to develop our team. We want to encourage people to want to work with us. But we do recognise that for the wider benefit that it's useful. So 4 times a year there is intention to do one-day training on neurodiverse conditions.
Yeah, I think that would be really useful. And I might be entering a bit of a minefield here, so forgive me. But, what if a coach is wondering, whether a client is neurodiverse, but they haven't presented as such?
If you've got good reason to think that somebody's barriers to achieving are their wiring, their neurodiversity, and the person doesn't know, is a very gentle conversation. You can ask me, you can message me, and I can sort of with a few questions and ask me, and I'm happy to sort of give that sort of advice to other coaches and that sort of stuff. We can do that, but you might want to look at something like Do It Profiler, which is a tool we use, we have a subscription to, that you can use to send. You can send a link to people and get them to complete that, and then it will give an overview of where they are with regards to their neurodiversity. or a decent indication of where they are, and then you can talk it through with them from there. So that's a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, I use the word minefield because I'm, really conscious of and feel really quite strongly personally that coaches shouldn't diagnose or, attempt to diagnose this. But, the actual reality of the situation is that we might be entering this grey area, shall we call it. But it strikes me that groups like yourselves who have the real expertise should be consulted. That's just my personal view.
Yeah, I think that makes you make a good point there, and absolutely coaches cannot diagnose, but I think it's okay to say to somebody, have you considered that some of your barriers to achieving this, to dealing with this, might be neurodiversity? So we keep hitting the same thing, and none of the strategies we've looked at so far have worked. So I quite like to consider maybe ones that might be more aligned to strategies for autism or for ADHD or for dyslexia, because perhaps those are the barriers. And then people are quite self-directed and will go and find out for themselves. But your framing of it, if you're going to go down that road, must be incredibly positive. You must be saying, I think that your challenges are this, but please don't think that's the end of the world, because it can be a real sort of bombshell when someone throws that sort of thing at you, and you can really really have to think about it. So, which is why I'm suggesting something like the Do It Profiler is helpful, because you're giving them an action point at the same time as dropping a bombshell, which takes them through and gives them some answers almost immediately, which means they can do something with it. If you're not going to use Do It Profiler, you might want to find some other links to tests and things they might do, and then start working through some strategies related to that. And if those strategies work, then they work. And that really is the only thing that matters. Ultimately, we all have an inherent right to thrive. If we're not, and identifying that the barrier to thriving is undiagnosed and therefore unsupported neurodiversity, why would you not?
Yeah.
Coaches are never going to be diagnosing, but it's sort of asking someone to ask that question of themselves, I think, is a reasonable and appropriate thing to do.
Thank you, Jannine. That's hugely helpful. And of course, I guess, that the coach themselves, they've got to be honest with themselves about their own level of knowledge and expertise.
Yeah.
And if they're straying into areas where they don't feel comfortable, then they've always got the Neurodiversity Network to refer to and to talk to.
They can, if they just want to ask a quick question, they can email. But if they want to have a more in-depth conversation, they can book an appointment, which I would charge for if they wanted a more in-depth conversation. But that's absolutely fine. We can run through the challenges that you've got and how you might be able to support somebody through that situation. At the end of the day, it isn't about that coach, and it's not about me or my organisation. It's about individuals and their right to thrive. So if there's something we can do that will help, then we will do that.
Yeah, I love that expression, right to thrive. You've shared some expressions with me today that have really struck a chord, the right to thrive, serenity. So, Jannine, thank you so much. It's been such a hugely interesting and really important conversation. So thank you. Thank you so much for your time today. So just to remind listeners then, if they want to explore this further, how do they get hold of you?
Come across to neurodiversitynetworks.org.uk. And you'll find all the information that you need, and an email address where you can get in contact, and links where you can book an appointment if that's what you want to do.
Wonderful, thank you. And is there anything that I haven't asked you today that you would like to be asked, or you would like to share with the listeners?
Oh, probably. That's it. Yeah, I'm sure there's a gazillion things that would have been. I think that the one thing I think is really important to understand is that neurodiversity is a model by which we can shift from a deficit model. So looking at ADHD as attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity disorder, and autistic spectrum disorder. The autistic community don't like ASD, they prefer ASC because that's autistic spectrum condition rather than autistic disorder. So the neurodiversity model helps us to move from a deficit model into a difference model, and positivity around neurodiversity is incredibly important. So if you have clients who are neurodiverse, please encourage them to celebrate those differences, to work with those differences, to accept them, put the serenity into the situation, accepting what they must about the situation, changing what they can, and having the wisdom to know the difference between the two. So it's really sort of celebrating difference is important, and not allowing anybody to feel like it's the end of the world, because it absolutely is not.
Wonderful, thank you. And on that note, I think that would be a good point to close. But once again, thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to hearing more about your project with the Association for Coaching. Thanks, Jannine. So thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. I've been Alex Morgan. Our purpose is to inspire and champion coaching excellence, to advance the coaching profession and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations and in turn society. If you'd like to find out more, please follow us on LinkedIn and explore our webpage at theassociationforcoaching.com. There you can keep up to date with our latest episodes and conversations, as well as our digital learning calendar.